I knew I was being ambushed the second I saw only one chair at the boardroom table. Victor Sloan sat at the head like a smug undertaker, arms crossed, no eye contact. Just that stiff little smile like he was about to hand me a condolence card instead of a contract. When he slid the manila folder toward me, it barely made a sound, but the silence that followed thundered in my ears. Executive restructuring, he said. We've decided to reduce overhead at the VP level. You've been a strong contributor, but the market is what it is. I opened the folder, saw the new salary figure, and almost laughed. 55% less. That wasn't a pay cut. That was an insult with a cover sheet. And then he added the real twist of the knife. We're aware of your daughter's college situation. These decisions aren't personal, of course, but you should be thinking practically. You've got obligations, and we need clarity by end of week. I didn't speak right away. I didn't flinch. I just stared at that number, as if looking harder would somehow make it reflect what I was actually worth. It didn't. It screamed one thing. They thought I'd be too scared to walk, that I'd fold quietly, out of maternal guilt and financial pressure, that I'd nod like a good little lieutenant and say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" I looked out the window. It was a crisp morning, blue sky, clean skyline, and something in me shifted. "I'll need 2 days," I said. Calm, controlled, almost bored. Victor raised one eyebrow, but said nothing as I stood, left the folder untouched on the table, and walked out. And hey, if you're caught up in this story already, take a second to like the video and subscribe. 97% of people listen without subscribing, but every click helps this team keep doing what we do. Now, back to the storm. By the time I reached the parking structure, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. From clarity, from the sudden snap of waking up inside your own life. See, what Victor didn't know, what the entire Bellwin executive team seemed too insulated to notice, was that I wasn't just another VP riding the coattails of someone else's vision. I was the pivot. The strategy behind our expansion into federal defense systems? Mine. The compliance protocols that let us qualify for DoD AI pilots? Also mine. I had the ears of contracting officers they'd never even met in person. Hell, half the acronyms in our internal white papers were things I'd personally drafted for review with federal liaisons over endless coffee and after-hours calls. Victor had walked into a war he didn't even know he was fighting. He thought the battlefield was a spreadsheet. He didn't realize it was me. And that tuition? Don't think I hadn't already gamed out the worst-case scenarios. I had contingencies in motion before the ink was dry on her financial aid paperwork. What I didn't have, until now, was the emotional push to walk away clean. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat in my home office, and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank email. Then I typed 6 words. Is your offer still on the table? The recipient? Lyora Daniels, CEO of Valoran Systems, Bellwin's most persistent shadow, our biggest competitor. A woman I met years ago at a defense tech conference who had, on more than one occasion, pulled me aside and said, "If you ever get tired of being underpaid and underestimated," she replied 4 minutes later, "Let's talk. Tomorrow, discreet location." I smiled, poured another glass. By the next day, I'd formed an LLC in my own name. Something clean, professional, separate from Bellwin and all its baggage. Just a shell for now, but a flexible one. I didn't copy a single file. I didn't take a single note. I didn't have to. Everything Bellwin was betting on was already in my head, and now they were betting against me. For 2 years, I kept Bellwin afloat while the rest of the executive suite played golf and passed around slide decks they didn't understand. It started quiet, just a whispered opportunity from a federal contact I'd known since my early days at Westbridge. They're looking into autonomous coordination overlays for battlefield logistics. You didn't hear it from me. I pitched it internally, got brushed off. Too niche, too much red tape, too slow-moving. Victor, in particular, called it academic noise. But I kept pushing, reframed the language, showed how the work we were already doing in fleet prediction could be molded with minimal overhaul into what DARPA was asking for. I knew their language, knew their fears, knew how to take a maybe from a risk-averse lieutenant colonel and turn it into a yes but quietly, with 3 follow-up memos and a compliance roadmap built for audit. That pivot, the $280 million pipeline that followed, it didn't fall from the sky. I stitched it together like a damn quilt, meeting by meeting, clause by clause. When the first pilot got greenlit, Victor suddenly decided he was the architect. He even used that word at the quarterly briefing. I let it slide, because the win mattered more than the ego. Back then. My name wasn't just in the footnotes, it was on the source files, the RFIs, the compliance attestations that made the feds even look in our direction. When the internal lawyers needed someone to explain what non-combatant adaptive interface logic actually meant, they didn't go to Victor, they came to me. And when they didn't, their revisions got kicked back because I'd already spoken to procurement and I already knew the review language they'd flag. Victor had a Rolodex of stale handshakes. I had relationships built on midnight calls, half-eaten chili dogs in DC hotel lobbies, and cleaning up messes other firms left behind. I never broke protocol, never overstepped, but I was the bridge. The translator between corporate bluff and federal reality. And still, I stayed. I sat through their casual diminishment, the board dinners where they introduced me last, the budgeting meetings where my name got trimmed off key contributor lists. I kept the machine running, even when they forgot I was the one who built the engine in the first place. Until Victor said it. "We know about your daughter's tuition." He didn't say it with menace. That's what made it worse. He said it like it was just business. Like reducing me to a financial liability was a footnote in his Tuesday. Like I'd crumble out of maternal obligation. That's when the resentment went from slow burn to surgical. He didn't just underestimate me, he presumed ownership of my fear. And that was his last real move. Because here's what I hadn't told anyone yet. I'd been watching Belwin's stock of political capital dwindle for months. I knew exactly which pipeline milestones were paper thin. I knew which pending DoD renewals were flagged high risk internally, even though Victor kept trotting them out at investor calls like guarantees. And I knew that 3 of our most lucrative proposals, projects I'd personally shepherded, were nearing final review. Without me, I didn't need to sabotage anything. I just needed to disappear. Let them explain to Washington why the point of contact on every sensitive initiative had suddenly gone quiet. Let them scramble when compliance asked for continuity documentation and found it riddled with contradictions. Let them squint at the fine print and realize that Victor's name wasn't on a single personnel assurance form. Mine was. I wasn't mad. I was lucid. Crystal. Damn. Clear. The moment the garage door shut behind me, I switched off my phone and sat in the dark. No music, no wine this time. Just silence and the rhythmic thrum of the water heater kicking on. That kind of silence doesn't ask questions. It answers them. I didn't call HR. Didn't forward anything to legal. Didn't send a furious Slack to someone in finance demanding an explanation. I wasn't going to tip them off with a "let's circle back" or a quick clarification on the comp shift. No paper trail, no smoke, just stillness. Because if I've learned anything after 15 years of being the person who made deals happen while others took credit, it's this. Panic is a gift. And I was done giving. I reached for the one card Belwin had hoped I'd never play. I opened my personal phone, scrolled past the usual noise, school fundraiser emails, a PTA thread about gluten-free bake sale options, and found the contact I'd never deleted. Lyora Daniels, the CEO of Valorant Systems. She'd been circling for years. A phantom orbit. Always polite, always restrained, but never fully backing off. I called. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was smooth, amused, like she already knew why I was calling. "We've been trying to get you for 3 years. I didn't waste air. Let's talk." She paused just long enough for it to feel like respect, not hesitation. "Tomorrow morning, neutral site. I'll send a location. Keep it light. No suits, and no Belwin email." She hung up without saying goodbye. I respected that. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. Every single personal Belwin document, meeting notes, travel memos, annotated white papers I drafted late at night when no one else gave a damn, gone. I didn't transfer a byte. I didn't need to. My value wasn't in what I could take. It was in what they'd taken for granted. Next, I formed an LLC. Not a vanity name, not something flashy, just clean, legal, flexible. The kind of entity that could sign consulting contracts under the radar and bill in flat rate cycles without triggering alarm bells. No overhead, no noise, just a vector for my next move. I filed, paid the expedited fee, locked it down with dual authentication, and stored the certificate in an encrypted vault. Then I sent one email from a private, unlinked address. Subject line, documentation complete. It wasn't for Lyora. It wasn't for anyone, really. It was for me. A marker. The line between before and after. Around midnight, I walked into my daughter's room. She was curled up in a pile of books and notebooks, prepping for the SAT like her future depended on it. I adjusted the blanket, brushed a few curls off her forehead. She didn't stir. She had no idea the financial trap had already been set for her. No idea that Victor Sloan thought he could use her tuition like a noose around my career. That Belwyn thought motherhood was leverage. They underestimated the one thing that made me untouchable. I would never let her be the reason I stayed small. Back in my office, I closed the laptop. My inbox was quiet. Belwyn didn't know I'd moved, and that made all the difference. 3 days later, Belwyn's proposal for the $96 million DoD expansion hit a wall. Not a hard no, just a phrase that stops momentum cold. Hold submission pending internal reevaluation. That's how the government tells you they smelled something off but aren't ready to accuse you outright. It's a pause with teeth, a courtesy before the storm. And when that phrase lands on your flagship proposal, the one you've already celebrated in press briefings and slid into quarterly projections, everything grinds into dread. Victor stormed out of his office, phone to his ear, voice low and clipped as he tried to reach our Pentagon liaison. No answer. He tried again. And again. Still nothing. He barked something to legal, then pivoted mid-step to berate a compliance coordinator for a delay she hadn't even caused. It wasn't panic yet, not full-blown, more like the first tremor before a building shifts, when the lights flicker and everyone looks up, waiting to see if it's over or just begun. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, I was seated in a quiet cafe across from a Valorant executive assistant who handed me a nondescript folder like we were in a spy novel. Inside, a draft onboarding letter addressed not to me personally, but to my LLC. Fixed-term contract, performance-based bonuses, double my Belwyn salary, and a quiet clause that made me smirk. 0 internal visibility, full autonomy, no attribution unless mutually agreed. Translation: no office politics, no slide decks for people who can't read data, no watching a half-drunk SVP hijack my work on stage because he once had a coffee with someone from procurement. Just deliver, get paid, leave a trail of results. I didn't sign right away. I sat with it for a full hour, ran my own mental due diligence. Valorant wasn't Belwyn. They moved with precision. Leaner, sharper, and far less concerned with looking good at industry galas than actually outmaneuvering the rest of the field. Leora didn't treat me like a flight risk. She treated me like a tactical upgrade. She didn't ask what Belwyn had done. She just said, "They got comfortable. We didn't." Back at Belwyn, the confusion was spreading. Someone from contracts flagged a discrepancy in our continuity assurance forms. Someone else asked why 3 of our federal access credentials hadn't been updated yet. Victor started issuing Slack messages like flares, short, sharp, and increasingly desperate. Every one of them contained a version of the same question. Who's got point of contact with the DoD on this? No one said my name out loud, but my name was on every form that now sat in limbo. I knew because I'd written most of them. The next morning, I got a message from an old friend in the compliance chain. No pleasantries, just a line. "They're looking for your documentation trail. What should I say?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The cracks were forming exactly where I knew they would, right at the seams no one but me had ever touched. The compliance backbone Victor ignored because it wasn't flashy. The personnel linkages he glossed over because they didn't fit on a pitch slide. Belwyn wasn't collapsing yet, but it had started leaning, and no one knew where the weight was shifting. The hotel suite Leora booked didn't have a view, didn't have fanfare, just crisp white walls, a round table, and 2 chairs that didn't match. That was intentional. I'd worked long enough in this industry to know, the more important the meeting, the more anonymous the venue. She greeted me with a nod, not a handshake. No small talk, no ego fluffing, just a soft click as she shut the suite door behind me and placed her phone screen down on the counter. "Your name," she said, "appears in 14 of the 22 compliance reports Belwyn submitted last year. I read them all. You didn't just help them pass inspection. You built the framework they used to pretend they were ready." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She wasn't buttering me up. She was documenting value. She slid a folder across the table. 1 page. Clean formatting. Everything that mattered fit in 3 paragraphs. A 12-month engagement under my LLC. Performance bonuses structured around output delivery, not bureaucratic rituals. And a clause buried near the bottom. Non-poach protections lifted. That was the real line. The signal flare. Belwyn had once been protected, contractually, politically, from direct talent siphoning. Not anymore. Whatever gentleman's agreement Leora had kept alive was over. She wasn't here to dance around egos, she was here to win. I read the contract twice. Then I looked up. 2 additions. She waited. A kill fee if Belwyn interferes with the engagement in any way, direct or indirect. Her lips twitched. And the second? Full credit on all submitted work. No more white labeling, no more ghost strategy. This time she smiled. Already done, she said. We don't hide our architects. I held her gaze for a beat, then reached for the pen. The moment my signature hit the line, I felt it, like setting down a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying for years. Belwyn hadn't just underpaid me, they'd robbed me of visibility, of authorship, of legacy. Now I had it back. Leora didn't gloat, she just collected the folder, handed me a secure badge for Valoran's HQ, and said, "Your start date is flexible, but the timing couldn't be better." On the way out, I passed a young staffer entering another suite down the hall. Clipboard in hand, badge tucked into her jacket. Government liaison. I didn't stop walking, but I did smile. Back in the car, I turned my phone back on and saw 3 unread messages from Belwyn, all marked urgent, all vague. Victor was fishing, he knew something had shifted. He just didn't know how far the current had moved beneath him. I rolled down the window and let the breeze hit my face as I pulled onto the interstate. DC traffic was crawling, but I didn't care. I was no longer inside the game they thought they controlled. Now, I was the variable they couldn't calculate. 2 weeks later, the email landed like a missile wrapped in politeness. Formal rejection. From the Department of Defense. Language cold enough to sting. Proposal denied due to lack of demonstrated continuity of personnel. Compliance trail incomplete. No further resubmissions at this time. No drama, no appeals, just a closed door and a long silence. Belwyn's CFO read it 3 times before forwarding it to Victor. The subject line said nothing, just the ticket number. Victor tried to spin it. In the emergency huddle with the executive team, he blamed shifting guidelines. The feds are tightening up everywhere, budget season, nothing to do with us. But someone asked a dangerous question. Did we submit with the original compliance lead listed? Victor paused just a little too long. Of course, he said, but it came out soft, hesitant. Like he was remembering too late that I wasn't there anymore, and realizing he had no one left who actually knew what had been submitted. The board meeting that followed was supposed to be a quick budget adjustment session. Instead, it turned into a post-mortem. Why is our largest contract, one we've projected revenue against, now gone? Victor offered vague answers, language about government churn, retention issues. The environment is shifting, he muttered. One of the board members pulled out the DoD rejection email on his tablet and read it aloud. No shifting environment, no ambiguity, just one phrase. No demonstrated continuity of personnel. And then, later that week, came the trades. A leak. Not from me, though I could guess where it came from. Valoran Systems secures $96 million defense contract. Insiders suggest former Belwyn executive behind compliance turnaround. They didn't name me directly, just a newly onboarded strategist operating under a boutique LLC. But anyone with half a brain could do the math. The scope was identical, the timeline aligned. The structure reeked of my fingerprints, not because I bragged, but because I designed every bone in that proposal's body. Victor saw it, I know he did, because he went quiet. No all hands, no updates, no sudden show of leadership, just whispers. His voice never rose above a murmur again. People noticed. The floor grew colder, meetings shorter. Legal started drafting memos in anticipation of further scrutiny. One by one, departments began sealing off access, auditing chain of custody logs, updating internal tracking systems for compliance vulnerabilities they suddenly remembered existed. They were looking for a saboteur, but there wasn't one. There was only absence. And that was the part they couldn't patch. You can't submit a personnel continuity plan when the person you need won't return your calls, doesn't work for you anymore, and built your whole house with bricks only she knew how to place. I didn't post. I didn't share the article. I didn't like it, quote it, forward it, or even screenshot it. I just read it once, then closed the tab. The implosion had begun, and all I'd done was sign my name. On Wednesday morning, Valoran updated their website. No fanfare, no press release, just a quiet revision to the leadership page. Below CTO, above VP of Strategic Programs, a new line appeared. Executive Consultant, Federal Systems, Linmore Strategies LLC. Principal, my name. That was it. One hyperlink, one line, one seismic shift. By lunch, it had been screenshotted, circulated, and dissected in 3 major industry newsletters. One analyst, always a little dramatic, called it a decisive brain drain timed with surgical cruelty. Another just wrote, Belwin lost their spine, Valorant absorbed it. And the markets noticed. Belwin's stock dropped 19 over 5 trading days. Not a crash, just steady erosion, like confidence draining through a hairline crack. Institutional investors flagged their risk positions. One fund, long aligned with Belwin's AI initiative, shifted weight overnight and rebalanced toward Valorant. The message was clear. Someone just became the safer bet. Inside Belwin, the mood shifted from confusion to suspicion. I didn't need insider updates. You can hear corporate fear in the silence, when LinkedIn activity spikes but no one posts anything real. When executives start updating job titles with vague strategic consultant tags. When you see someone from HR suddenly endorse your skills after years of ignoring your presence. That Friday, I received an email from Victor. No greeting, no context, just a single word in the subject line. Conversation? I didn't open it. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to clarify. He'd made his move. I made mine. The board might still be hoping for a patch, but Victor already knew the truth. The tide had turned and I wasn't rowing backward. I archived the message. No response, no read receipt. Just gone. Filed away like an outdated memo from a version of my life I no longer answered to. And as all this unfolded, I didn't post a thing. I didn't gloat. Didn't comment on the analyst's takes. Didn't refresh stock tickers like I used to in the early days of my career when I thought the numbers somehow reflected my worth. Instead, I walked my daughter through a practice financial aid form and watched her face light up when she realized she could aim higher, not out of fear of cost, but with full confidence in backing. I thought we were going to need loans, she said quietly. I smiled. We won't. The pivot wasn't just business. It was life. Realigned, reclaimed, rewritten. And Belwin? They still hadn't figured out how quiet the fall would be. The ballroom was glass and steel, modern, cold, and glowing with money. Every table adorned with navy blue linens, crystal glassware, and the low murmur of government contractors pretending to be glamorous. The National Tech Defense Gala was always more politics than celebration. But this year, it felt different. This year, Valorant was the main event. We'd been awarded the top innovation distinction for adaptive AI deployment in logistical theaters, what Belwin had once called a moonshot that'd drain resources. Now it was the reason we were seated at the head table, with Lyora flanked by agency directors and procurement heads leaning in like disciples. I sat to her right. No name tag, no fanfare, just presence. When they announced the award, I didn't go on stage alone. Lyora walked with me. She accepted the plaque with a calm smile, then turned and gestured toward me. She built the foundation, she said into the mic. Valorant just had the sense to give her credit. A small ripple of applause followed. A few heads turned. More than a few, actually, because the people in that room weren't just investors and engineers. They were watchers, evaluators. The type who could recognize when power had migrated without ever making a sound. And that's when I saw him, Victor. He slipped in through the side entrance, late, of course, wearing a charcoal suit and the look of a man who didn't know whether to bluff confidence or hide behind the ice sculpture. He froze when he saw me on stage. Mid-step, one foot hovering like he couldn't decide whether to proceed or retreat. His eyes tracked me like I was a ghost he hadn't buried deep enough. And in that instant, the whole illusion cracked. Whatever fiction he'd been telling the board or himself about who mattered and who didn't. I stepped down from the stage. I didn't look for him. I didn't need to. He followed the room with his eyes, but no one followed his lead. During the reception, a former Belwin colleague, someone who'd once cut me out of a strategy session to make room for an intern with fresh perspective, walked up with a champagne flute and a forced smile. "You look incredible," she said, too brightly. I nodded once. No smile. Just sipped my drink and turned back toward the balcony. Let her carry that silence home. Outside, the air was cool, sharp with autumn. The city lights bled against the river in gold streaks. Lyora joined me a few minutes later. She didn't speak, just stood beside me, glass in hand. Then, with a half smile, she raised her drink and tapped it gently against mine. That was it. No toast, no gloating, just acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't need to be said out loud. Inside, they played a highlight reel of Valoran's recent work, my work. Belwyn's table sat near the back, two junior directors looking out of place, checking their phones. Victor? I never saw him leave, but I imagine he didn't stay long. It came on a Monday. Gray, forgettable, buried in emails and quarterly projections. The kind of day where even good news feels like background noise. Then a message arrived from a mutual contact, an old compliance liaison who'd once warned me quietly, don't let them shrink your title just because it fits their story. The message was short, just a forwarded screenshot. Victor Sloan's LinkedIn post. After an incredible run in strategic growth and innovation, I'm now exploring new consulting opportunities, open to conversations, collaborations, and future ventures. Let's connect. 2 likes, no comments. His profile photo looked older, like someone had tried too hard to look unbothered. Collared shirt, fake smile, the slightly too wide eyes of a man who knew he was no longer being called into boardrooms, only ghosted by recruiters who'd already read the trades. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I forwarded the image to Leora with no caption. She replied a minute later, "Tuition's covered, I hope." I laughed, because it was. Along with the mortgage, along with the early buy-in on my daughter's dorm move-in checklist and the small art studio I finally rented for myself. The one with the east-facing window and the smell of possibility, Belwyn had hoped to save a salary. That one decision, that quiet cut they thought I'd eat in silence, it cost them the continuity clause. The contracts, the DoD pipeline, the investors' trust, and the one person in the building who knew which screws held the foundation together. No scandal, no lawsuit, no headline backlash. Just a quiet subtraction. And then numbers doing what numbers always do when they lose their architect. Victor faded. The new leadership at Belwyn started using words like stabilization phase and core reassessment. They tried pivoting to edtech. They spun press releases out of fluff and grant applications. None of it stuck. Meanwhile, Valoran moved ahead with a new federal initiative. My LLC handled implementation. Nobody asked about Belwyn anymore. They weren't missed. One night, sitting on the porch with a glass of rye and the last of the summer heat clinging to the air, I pulled up that LinkedIn post again. Still 2 likes. I let the screen dim. Funny how silence can echo louder than any revenge. You just have to know when to walk away and when to let the numbers do the talking.
아니, 이 양반은
아드님이 왔다시다.
화장실 따시지.
낚시조 아드님이 화장실 키키키키요.
아니, 이 양반은 김밥 가지러 보내놨더만 화장실로 튀어? 어우, 나는 추워 죽겠는데.